Okay, sweet. Welcome to session 2 if you were here last week, and welcome to your first session if this is your first one. Let's get started. So I'm just going to open up a survey quickly on Top Hat about some feedback about the course. This survey will also be open up at the end of the course, at the end of this session. So don't worry if you can't get an answer in, but I'm going to open that now. And it's open for 5 minutes, but after about a minute and a half, I'll move on, but I'll keep it open until it's done. Okay, I'm going to leave it open, but we're going to move on. And I'll open this up at the end of session again. Okay, so this session, we're going to be diving deeper into CSS. But first, before we start that, we're going to do a little refresher on HTML and what we learned for CSS in the last session. Then we're going to look at design systems and CSS frameworks at the end. So these are some links that you guys might want to follow. The website has the slides as well as where you submit your exercises, and then a bunch of other resources for you guys. And exercise files are through this GitHub. I just wanted to show you quickly how to download GitHub slides, GitHub files, because some of you might not know how to do that. If you click on it and you click code here, then you can download it as zip, and it's probably the easiest way to do it. And also if you go into one of the days, so we're in day 2 examples, then you can you click on a file and you can download just the file here, or you can also just copy and paste it. The easiest way though is going to be to go to code and download the zip file here. Okay, cool. Yeah, so just going over HTML and CSS again, what we learned last time. So HTML is basically the structure of the page. We talked about it being the skeleton and how things are laid out. So it's the order of which you see content and what content is actually on the page. And then the syntax, we'll see this again this session. We'll look at some HTML code again. It's a start tag and end tag in those square brackets. And then in it is whatever you want it to be. So we looked at headers and p tags and also a tags for links. And there's a bunch of other ones that you guys can look up. Inner content is what is inside of those tags. So that is usually what is going to be displayed onto the screen. For headers, that is your header that will show up. And then like p tags, that is the actual words. Attributes are within those square brackets or within the tags. And those are just more information about how the browser is going to display those tags. So like on the a tag, the anchor tag, we have for a link, we have where the link is actually going to go. That's going to go in an attribute. And then CSS, what we talked about last time, is how HTML looks. So it's the colors, how big things are, stuff like that, how things are laid out. Yeah, and many more. CSS is a huge language that we can't cover in a course, and you just have to go and try it yourself to actually fully understand it. But that being said, we're going to look more into depth about more CSS things in this session. So first quick question, I'm going to close the last one. There's 50 seconds left. Again, we'll open it at the end of this session. I'm going to close this response pool, and then I'm going to open up this quick question. So this is just, it gives you some HTML code and asks you which one it will render. Okay, 1 more minute to respond. Okay, cool. Yeah, so for this one, we have some tags up here and then some HTML here. And we see that big should be a height of 55 of whatever the view height is. And then the really telling part of this is the background color for dark is going to be black and the color for the text is going to be white. So we see for this one, background color white, sorry, color white and then background color black. And then quick question 2, we will open up. There you go. Okay, so for this one, the answer is B here because if we look at dark with this bonjour, the background color is white, as in here, and then the color is red. So we're gonna go right into breakout rooms here. The starter code is again at GitHub, and you can download it like I showed you at the start. And then your mentors can help you to take that starter code and design what you see here. So you guys can all go into your breakout rooms now. Okay, sweet. So yeah, I hope you guys can all figure that out. If you can, you can always go back and try it out later. So now we're going to move on to advanced CSS, which is going to be looking more in depth about what you can do with CSS. So first thing we're going to cover is pseudo selectors. Pseudo selectors are things that you can add to the selector that you've given. So if you remember CSS, we have what selector, which is basically what element we want to affect. So in this case, we have A. And then the pseudo selector is here, this hover part. So on this GIF, we can see that once the mouse hovers over it, we're going to color green. And that's just pseudo selectors, like different things we can do to tell the CSS parser basically once this happens, we want something different to happen. And then here's a link to a bunch of series selectors. Media queries. So media queries, yeah, look at what the browser is doing right now. A main one that we're going to look at is the size. So if we look down here, once it gets smaller, this submit exercise button goes onto the next line and gets bigger, and that's media queries. That's not automatic. We define that ourselves. And then there's a bunch of different media queries, but the main one is size. Yeah, so max width. Yeah, max width is once we get to this width, we want to change. And that's just done to the whole thing. So we have media max width, 600 pixels. We can define our own pixels. And then, yeah, conditional CSS. Again, this thing only happens up to 600. So yeah, 600 or lower is a better way to explain it. Yeah, order matters. So once we do these, it's like an if statement in Python. If we have if statements, it's going to catch whichever one's first. So that's why we want this one. So max width 900, it's going to catch everything under 900, then everything under 768, and then everything under 300. We want it in that order because if we do this, it's always going to be 4 because it's always going to be below 900. Min width is the same idea as max width, except for min width. So here, instead of 600 and lower, we have 600 or higher. And we can put any CSS here that we want. Yeah, order again matters for min width. So you just have to be careful if you're not getting what you want and you're using min width. One thing to check is the order. And then just like point this out, we have media here with the curly braces, and then inside of it, we have H1. Print, this one's not used a lot, but if you control P a page and if you control P any page, you can print it out to a PDF or to a printer. This just captures that event, and then it'll do conditional CSS based on that. So usually this won't apply, but if you have a page that you think will be printed, then this can be very helpful for that. Yeah, so like if we're printing the University of Calgary site and we don't want like this red header and stuff, and we just want it to look a bit different, that's when we use the print media query, and we can make it look different on the printing page. The screen, so this one, yeah, 99% of people, so this is just the opposite of print, basically. So yeah, like if you don't, again, here, if you don't want to show up in a print and you want it to show up in screen, you can use this. This isn't used very often, but it's something that's useful if you need it. So we have this exercise here, this space, and we want to add a media query for when you shrink the page size, then the world jumps down. So we're going to put you in your break rooms and you can figure that out. All right, welcome back. So next up, we have display. So display is just how elements interact with each other and how they interact with the page. So each element has its own display, and we can change the default. Yeah, each element has its own default display, but we can change that if we want it to look different. So a big thing that displays affect is new lines, or next, like if they appear next to each other. Let's go just look at an example. It'll make more sense. Yeah, so the first one we're looking at is block. These ones each has their own block. That's what it sounds like, and it'll break onto the next line. We just set the display as display block, and then it'll pop over to the next one. P tags are blocked by default. So if you have two P tags, even if they're just one word and they could wrap around to the, like on the same line, they'll always just jump to the next line unless you do display inline for these. And these, it's again, what it sounds like. It's just going to make sure it tries to stay in line with everything else. So here, instead of block, we put these both as inline. And instead of jumping to the next line for each part, it's just going to stay in the same line and go right next to each other, looking like one HTML element, but it's actually two. And then inline block is kind of a mix of it. So these ones, it's more like inline than it is like block, but these ones, you can still have width and height. So when it's inline, you can't specify how high you want it to be, but in block, inline block, you can. So you can, it acts like a block still, like you can specify where it is, but it's still going to be all in the same line. It's not going to make a new line for you. Yeah, so here's another exercise, real quick one coming up. And then you're going to get a page and you're going to want to make it look like the one down here. And again, you can start with the code up top here. Sweet. Okay. So there's a good question in the chat that I just want to address. So basically most tags have the default as block. One of them that doesn't is a span, and that's just used usually within p tags. If you want like a word that looks different in a paragraph, then you can use a span tag, but most of them are blocks. And again, if you're not sure, you can always just look it up and it'll be somewhere in the documentation. Okay, so next up, we're going to look at CSS variables. And these are kind of like what they sound like. If you've had experience in any other programming language, you know what a variable is. And we have the same thing in CSS. So yeah, so how to use them. So we're gonna define them all in the root, and that just makes sure we can use them in anything else. We usually name them with this dash dash and then the name that we wanted, and then we can have the color variable here or any other variable. So here we have sizing variables, and we just call on it using this var keyword. So I just have some code. So this is from the GitHub, and we see that we're using all of these different variables, and then we can use these variables down in our other CSS. And this is, yeah, I'm gonna go back to the slides. This is useful for allowing them people to create themes. If you want everything, like if you, usually when you're making a site, you have a few different colors that you're using, and you're using those colors in a lot of different places. Instead of copying those places down a bunch, we can do it once at the top. And then if we ever do want to change it, like we want to choose a different theme, or we think this color, another color would fit the theme better, we can always just change it at the top instead of changing all of these different things in like a bunch of different places in the code. We only have to change it once. And we can make cool things like this, where we have the light mode and dark mode changing using these variables, because the CSS will have the same variable name, and then we can just change the variable value. So we're going to look at this in another exercise by using the same thing. And there's no link here, but it'll be in the same GitHub as the other links. Okay, cool. Before we move on, I just want to highlight two things. So if you look at the slides, you have a bunch of these hidden ones, and this is just position. If you want to go check that out, you can read these docs, read the slides here, and then you can also look it up. They're useful for if you like where you place things on page, and especially useful for nav bars. Another thing I want to go over, in some of these exercises, we have this like a lorem ipsum, this speech that doesn't really make sense. And a lot of times developers will use that just to fill in place they want text, but they don't know what the text is. If you want to add that to your site, you can just go into your site, and then if you do lorem and then like the number of words you want. So if I want 15 words and I just hit enter, then it'll just make 15 random words for me that I can use to play around with how words look without actually knowing the content of it. Next up, we're going to look. So yeah, grids are complicated. They're very useful, but they're complicated. If you want to look, you can look here. If you know what a flexbox is, they're kind of the same thing. But yeah, grids are complicated, but very useful. So if you have time, you can check those out. Okay, now we have a bunch of CSS, but we don't know, like, what do we do now? What do we do with all these tools that we have? We just have like a bunch of things. How do we make things well? Yeah, so we're running into a blank canvas problem, which is you have all these possibilities. You have you can make anything. And it's hard to think of one thing to do when you just have such a wide open problem. So people have gone in and had like ideas and these guidelines to make CSS that make it a little bit easier to know what to do. Oh, I'm going backwards. Yeah, so there's design systems that people have made that help out. So Google's material design is a very popular one that is used in the industry a lot. I actually used this at a job once, so just finding it out can be used. It's not just something that you start with, and it's like something that only beginners use. People use this all across the industry, and it's Google, so you know it's going to be good. And then another way to do it is we can make components. So from other programming languages, we have functions. And when we break something out into a function, is because we have this piece of code that we want to repeat a bunch, but we want it to kind of stay on its own. That's kind of what components are in what the web dev world, like in HTML and CSS. We want to, so we want to have something that we can have repeatable. So then it's just useful in the way that we can, if it's broken, we can fix it in one place. Stuff like that. So here are different examples of components, things that are reused over and over again. So stuff like navbars can be components, stuff like certain buttons, and we'll see an example later on of a component and go more in depth into it. Yeah, so again, component basically just a block of CSS that we want to use over and over again. Example. So if we look at this page, we again see that lorem ipsum showing up, but this is just a wall of text. It doesn't look very nice, and we can see that this is a repeatable problem. So we always have question 9 and then a bunch of text, and it doesn't really look that nice. So we don't like it because there's a ton of text, and then you have to scroll down. It's just a mess, and it's not very fun to look at or read. So we can make these accordions, which is just the expandable parts, and this we can break out into a component. So then you can use it on all those different questions. Yeah, so if we do that and we break it out into accordions, then we see this is a lot nicer, and we don't have to write it over and over and over again. So, and it's just repeatable code. It looks nice when something's repeated, and it's just easier for us as developers. And here are just some examples of accordions. If you go to a site now that you know what an accordion is, you'll start to see them more often. You go to a site and you'll be like, okay, that's an accordion. So other advances of components, I kind of talked about this, but if you have a bug and you only fix it once and not a bunch of different places, that's a good practice across all of software engineering. You want code that you don't want to repeat code. It's called dryness. Don't repeat yourself. And that's just what components help with. Yeah, so there's two ways to do this within our code. We're going to look at semantically and class-based. Semantically is basically using the tags and the HTML tags. It's just using the idea that HTML tags are kind of their own components. So we can use these like detailed summary, and we can make components out of this. One very popular way to do this is called Pico CSS. So here's a doc, you can go look that up, but this is just something that you can use that a third party has made, and you can use it in your own site. Another way is class-based. This is probably the more, you'll see this more often. And this is just where you'll put a bunch of classes, and those classes will have a CSS file, and then we can have things like that. A bunch of elements have the exact same class, and that's how we make these repeatable elements. So yeah, one issue with this is the code is longer. Sometimes you'll see a div and then class, and it'll have like 10 different classes, and it's harder to read. But it can have more features built in, and it's easier to put like two classes together and get the best of both worlds using this system. Yeah, so here's just a little pros and cons thing. I'm not going to go over all of this, and we covered most of it, but if you want to look back, so yeah, one main thing is class-based. You can mix things up, and it's usually the more used one. Yeah, so we're going to go and look through how to build a class-based one. So here's an example of a class-based. So we're going to this side-by-side thing. Yeah, so we see it's called aligned image, and this is reused over and over again in this site. And that's because we're using this class-based component, and we're just repeating it over and over again for these different images. And right now they're like this demi text, but in a website, you can imagine that repeating over and over again is really useful for the things we've stated before. Yeah, so start with a name. We call this one a line image. And then these are just the things that we want in our thing. So we want an image and a text. We want a 50-50 split, and we want it to be able to go left or right side. So we're going to make one of them just to like play around with it on our website. So we're just going to starting out, this is not a component. This is just an image and a text. We can split it just using some CSS. We can split it to 50-50. And then we're using these words are the ones that we've just defined here. So this class here is what we've defined. And that's really important to use in our CSS because that's going to allow us to do it repeatedly later. Yeah, and then we can just keep going with the CSS here. We're just adding more things in order to meet those requirements that we stated above. And then continually making these changes so that it looks more and more like how we want it to look. So then after we're done this, how we make it repeatable is next time we have that first one that we try things out with. And then now that we have that and we've developed that out, next time we add a div and we add like images in it, we can just stick this class name onto that div tag, and then everything will follow along after that. So instead of writing CSS for this tag, CSS for this tag, CSS for this tag, we just have it all following because we wrote it once and we can reuse that class in other places. So yeah, next we're going to go, and instead of making that side by side, we're going to try to make this card component. And then if you want to, you can try repeating that card component over and over again and just seeing how much easier it is than writing the CSS over and over and over again. Okay, sweet. So yeah, you saw how to build that card element for, so yeah, for code. So there's a link in the chat for an example of the side-by-side element for what we saw up here. Yeah, and then you can go look at that code pen to see how he did it. Moving on, so we can kind of nest components and we can make components out of components. So here we can make this component called 3-card row that uses our card component that we made. And we can just make this, and then we can also make like a grid of cards, and we can just keep going with this. Yeah, and so just make it easier and easier for us to develop. Yeah, and here's an example of the code. We have 3-card group, and then that's our card element we made 3 times, and inside of this we'll have the card code, and then we can use this 3-card group after we've done the CSS to repeat it. Yeah, so CSS is not super easy. So even people in industry look up CSS, and there's a bunch of different like problems. Oops, there you go. Sorry, I had my screen paused. So just going back to what we were talking about. Yeah, so we have the 3-card one here, and then here's the code that we have with the 3-card group and 3 cards. Okay, so yeah, everyone Google CSS. People who have been using CSS for years, Google CSS. It's probably like almost recommended to Google CSS because CSS changes a lot. So if you're just memorizing it, you're going to miss out on these new things that come out. What's nice about online documentation is it's often updated. So if you're looking things up, then you can usually get the latest things. The things that the CSS team has put out, you can get those things with, and if you memorize, then your knowledge can be a little bit out of date. Yeah, so CSS takes a long time. If you work on a project and you're making a site, then you can have the CSS, and like the Shoe Ignite site, we can see that it has 9,500 lines, and CSS takes a lot of writing. So how do we do this? How can we get around this problem and make CSS a little bit easier? We can use something called CSS frameworks. So these are basically people who are really good at CSS. They went and built. It's kind of like if you're familiar with Python libraries, it's just a collection of really good CSS that we can pull from, that we can import from the web. So one of them, yeah, sorry. So CSS frameworks, yeah, they're done for you. We can use them. They're a lot easier to use. They're usually done very well. And they're also, again, updated so we can get really new design standards. And if something new comes out, we can use those as well. Yeah, so next time we're going to look at Bootstrap, which is a CSS framework that a lot of people use. And we're going to look at implementing that into our sites. And it's just a lot easier to use. And they usually look really good because these are people who have been using and making stuff with CSS for a long time, and they're just really good at it. Yeah, so there's exercises that you guys can complete for next week. So it's due next Friday. You're going to be making a site called Canvas, and you're going to want to use Pico CSS is a good thing to use. And then also for level 2, we can see we're using components here. And then again, level 3, we're using these components, the side by sides. So do the highest one you can and then submit on the exercise submission link on the Schulich Ignite website. So that's it from me. We're going to put you in breakout rooms, but before you head out, I just want to remind you that I'm going to be opening the feedback poll for 5 minutes. You'll be in breakout rooms, but just please remember to do that before you leave. And thank you for coming.